Hello and welcome to another X-Ray Tech video. Today we're going to be talking about templating a slide presentation in just a few seconds. So if you create things like a meeting agenda on Google Slides and you create that agenda once every week or every month, this video is for you. This is going to be able to create a slide presentation in just a few seconds. Now there's a ton of other things you can do using these methods, like auto creating a document or sending a document and a slide presentation off in an email. We're going to cover those in other videos. For now, we're just going to be building a templated slide presentation in Google Slides. Let's get into it. In this tutorial, we're going to be using three different pieces of software. We're going to be using Zapier, Google Slides, and Airtable. Now, you could use other tools like Typeform or Google Forms if you wanted to, but these are the three we're going to use here today, and a lot of the principles still transfer. So as long as you're using Zapier or Integromat, some other automation tool, the principles in this tutorial will still be useful. So the first thing we're going to do here in Google Slides is create our presentation. So create your presentation, duplicate a weekly agenda presentation you already have, whatever works, and we need to create slots essentially for Zapier to insert variables into. Now, it sounds a little bit more technical than it really is. All we're doing is inserting curly braces around what we're defining as a variable. And in this case, we're calling it client name, meeting date, progress updates, a graph, next steps, and next meeting. It's important to make sure that there's no spaces inside of these curly braces. Spaces will work inside of Google Slides, but they won't inside of Google Docs. So it's just easier to never include a space inside of the curly braces. And it's also important to know that the styling of the text of the words in the slides presentations will be adopted by the variables that you insert in here. So if your client name is X-Ray Tech, then X-Ray Tech will be, in this case, size 14 font, right? And inserted right there. And it's also important to know that you can put images in addition to text to all of these things. And we're going to show you that right here in the graph. So the slide presentation gets all set up. You don't need to actually define it as a template inside of Google Slides. It does not need to be a template inside of Google Slides. What it does need to have is this number right here. This is the ID associated with this slide presentation. We'll get into this a little bit more in the Zapier section when we talk about templates versus really just the file. So have that in the back of your head for the second half of this tutorial. But for now, we just set up our Google Slides presentation. This is step one. And now we have all of the slots that we want to insert the variables into. So let's head on over to Airtable and check this out. So this is our Airtable with two views. We have a grid view and we have a weekly meeting slide deck form that we can enter in all this information in. And we even have a graphic that we can just upload a file into. So when we complete this survey, all of this data immediately goes right into this grid view. The important part about Airtable is that every variable that you created inside of Google Slides has a corresponding field here inside of Airtable. This is essentially the data store that you're going to be sending over to Google Slides. So in this case, every single content area, every single data point in your Google Slide is in your Airtable base. And some of that, or most of that, is collected via the form, and one field is calculated inside of Airtable. So everything in your Google Slide presentation needs to be referenced inside of your Airtable if you're going to be inserting those variables in a dynamic way. And you see we even have some formula fields here. A single line of text, a date field, paragraph text, an asset field, attachment field rather, and this formula field. And all this formula field is doing is adding 7 days to the meeting date. So in our slide presentation, right, this variable at the end, the next meeting date, we're just calculating that. We don't need to ask the human what is 7 days from now. So this Airtable setup is really, really simple. Just two views, a form and a grid view. And we're gonna use the grid view to trigger our automations inside of Zapier. So let's go inside of Zapier and see how this automation is actually set up. All right, so here we are in Zapier. We have a simple two-step automation here. And the first step is gonna be new record in view. That is very important and a very powerful function here inside of Airtable and Zapier. So we're selecting our tutorial base, weekly meeting slide deck as a table, and our view is just a normal grid view. And you can see that in here, we only have two views, the normal grid view and the form view here. So this is it. Let's test this trigger and get some solid test data. It's always best practices here. You just click load more. Usually you get a few more. Here we go. So now inside of this test data here, all of this data is the data that we're going to use to insert into the slots that we created inside of our Google slide. Now, it's really important that you begin this process with real data, or at least fake data that you are sure fulfills all the criteria of what your real data will be. In other words, you need test data to create the automation. If you don't seed all of this, if you don't create the slides presentation first, if you don't create the Airtable base first and fill out that survey first, it's going to be really difficult for you to actually construct this automation, if at all possible, to be honest. So having test data is critically important for success when you're building automations. So this is step one. Great, we have test data. We're in a good spot. Let's go on to step two. So we're going to create a presentation from a template in Google Slides. Now, Zapier and Google Slides use the word template very differently. In Google Slides, when you create a template, it goes inside of a template library, and everyone on your Google Drive can then use that template. On Zapier, that is not necessarily the case. You don't need to deem a Google Slide presentation a template in the eyes of Google Slides. You just need to be able to directly reference the presentation. So in this example here, the presentation, the template presentation, this is actually showing all of the Google Slides that you have associated with your account. There's an enormous amount of slides there that you could choose from. But notice this number on the bottom, begins with 1, ends with BW here. That is the ID of the Google Slides presentation. So just to go all the way back to our original Google Slides presentation, that is the same number as I just highlighted here. So 1EH and then ends in BW, this alphanumeric code is the ID of this particular Google Slides presentation. So when Zapier calls for a template, they're calling for really an ID of the Google slide that you want to reference and create a copy of. So small nuance there between how different softwares use the word template, just trying to save you some time and confusion, really. So, and just to demonstrate this a little bit further, I will just copy this ID and I will go into Zapier and I'll insert a custom ID, and I'm just gonna paste that ID right here. And, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna paste that ID inside of the field and click off of it here. And you see all of these fields stay there because all of these fields, meeting date, client name, progress updates, graph, right? If we go back to here and we say client name example, right? I'll just add the word example here. And I refresh these fields, you see that client name example just popped in. So now we're gonna go back and select our client name variable from our step 1 in Airtable. That's just to show you here that these are connected, right? This is the ID of that Google Slides presentation, and all of these fields are being read by Zapier as slots that you can insert variables into. And we can just remove this extra field because we don't need it anymore, right? That was the old name of the field. So let's continue. And now we are going to retest this action. Hopefully we get that nice green bar right here. And there we go. We are all set. And if we scroll down, it says it worked, but let's actually check. So we're gonna search for an alt link, alternate link right here. You see this? So this is the actual link of the file. So I'm gonna open up an incognito window, paste that right there, and here we are, sample co to today's date or yesterday's date, and all of the material gets inserted here. So I hope this video has been helpful. Now you know how to create your Google Slides presentations in just a few seconds. In our next video, we're gonna be adding to this automation. We're gonna add a Google Doc to this automation. We're gonna add an email to this automation, maybe even a Slack notification. It's gonna be awesome. So please like and subscribe this video if this has been helpful to you. It really helps the channel. We're trying to save 1 billion hours of mindless work for humans. Join the movement, it's awesome. Links and resources are in the description down below, and don't forget, keep the flow.